Morning, everyone. We have a very small technical problem, but we'll try to do with it. So today we will make a short presentation in the morning on the CFTA and the national. Also, I will be talking in my capacity. I've been a trade rule advisor to the ECA, and I have followed the CFTA negotiation process throughout since 2016. And the gender component has not taken a major place in the negotiation so far. So I'd like you, with all the knowledge that you have acquired during the last days, to educate me about how to mainstream gender into the CFTA. So I will be making the presentation, and I'd like you to challenge everything that I will say using the gender lens. So I have already introduced the objective of the session. So please, let's talk about the CFTA using the concept you have acquired. So to start with, the CFTA is the culmination of a very long-standing process. There has been many declaration, plans, treaty, acts of the OAU and then of the AU talking about how to economically integrate the continent. And although the CFTA has officially been launched with the 2012 decision on BIAT and fast-tracking the CFTA, which was AU summit decision, the discussion has started some time before. So just throwing ideas out, when do you think the first occurrences of this idea of creating a continental, pan-African FTA has emerged in the AU or OAU institutions? So just to bounce on and start the discussion. Do you have any idea of when this CFTA idea started? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. That was in 2012.
So, okay, 2012. That was the AU decision, the summit decision on BIAT and fast-tracking the continental free trade area. So that was indeed the moment when the summit has taken the official step to start the CFTA process. But any idea of when the idea of integrating the continent has emerged? Actually, it has started very early within the story of the AU, even with the story of the OAU, because it was during the first meeting of the Organization for African Unity that the idea of creating a continental free trade area emerged. So our heads of state commissioned an ad hoc committee to do the feasibility study on creating a continental free trade area when they created the OAU in 1963. So already at that time there was this idea of integrating the continent, and not only so they commissioned this study to create on how feasible was it to create a continental FTA, but they also considered how to complement this FTA with a common external tariff to make this, to create a continental customs union. And the third component of this decision was also to start harmonizing economic policies. So the germs of, or the seeds of a common market were already at the back of the minds of the summit back in 1963. And now in 2019, we're still discussing the technicalities of this first step, creating the FTA. In 2012, then in 2015, you may know that the summit, realizing that the roadmap to establish this continental FTA had not been followed, so they decided to shortcut basically the roadmap to start the negotiation at a member state level, because at direct level progress had not been sufficient and not been even enough throughout the continent to harmonize the regional FTAs. So in 2015, the negotiations of the CFTA had officially been launched, and they started in 2016. And the objective of the BIAT decision, the 2012 BIAT decision, was to double intra-African trade within a decade. So the baseline that we are looking at is how much of intra-African trade was happening in 2012. And at the time, well, intra-African trade was fairly low at about 12% of total trade. However, the idea was that, one, if you look at the other international, the other economic bloc throughout the world, well, they are much more integrated than ours. And two, the intra-African trade had this this point that intra-African trade was much more industrialized than that trade with the rest of the continent. So over the past 8 years, the structure of intra-African trade has not changed much. So what you see here, at least for the intra-African part of it, is more or less the picture we had already in 2012. However, the amount of intra-African trade compared to total trade is now about 17–18%. So we are midway to meeting our objectives of the BIAT decision. So, as you can see, so on both graphs, the bar on the left-hand side is intra-African trade compared with trade with the rest of the world. And you can see that intra-African exports are much more sophisticated than exports to the rest of the world. The share of manufactured goods in intra-African export represents more or less 43% or 44% of total exports to the rest of the continent, whereas primary commodities account for a much lesser part of this trade. However, if you look at trade with the rest of the world, it's the contrary. Fuels and primary commodities account for nearly 60–70% of the structure of our exports, whereas the manufactured goods account for only 20%. So, because that was already the case in 2012, the heads of state decided to really capitalize on this observation and to push for intra-African trade. So, is it okay? Am I going too fast, or is it fine? Right. So, if you look at the opportunities for African exports to African markets, you can see that the potential for exports is largely untapped. Here you have a graph of what are the potential exports, the potential market for African exports, and the size of the bubble represents the volume or the value of those opportunities. So the bigger the bubble, the bigger the potential. So you can see that South Africa, well, SACU in general represents a very interesting market for our countries, but, well, a bit surprisingly too, some other SADC countries such as Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Zambia, and to a lesser extent, Northern Africa represent an interesting opportunity for export for our countries. So you can see that there are two colors. Well, you can't really see it, but there are two shades in each bubble. The core of it is the trade that is already happening. And the outside layer, the clearer part, is the untapped potential. So, for example, for African export, only 54% of the export potential is exploited in South Africa. In Morocco, for example, it's only 37%. So there is a huge gap for improvement. Now, if we zoom in into one specific market, in this case I have chosen South Africa, and look at product-specific opportunities, you can see that although the biggest untapped potential is chemicals, there is very good opportunities for textile, which is here, agricultural products, here, here for meat, for example, here you have bananas, and agro-food too, and fisheries. Now, based on the discussion you have had this week, what does it say in terms of opportunities for women? Like, I'd like now to start engaging into a discussion. So, from a gender perspective, what are the opportunities here? What does it say? Yes.
Yeah, well, when we look at the market potential under the AFCFTA, we look at the sectors like agriculture and fisheries that employ a higher percentage of women being earmarked as potential sectors that will spur growth and increase trade. This directly implies that more women will get into the market, but equally there is the threat that if these sectors are industrialized, women will not be the traders, but they will be the workers under this sector. So it's a balanced analysis that must be taken with care, because from research, it has been proven that if agricultural sector opens up for export, more capital is pumped in, and women who were formerly producers and traders become employees under this sector. And that equally affects their income level and as well can trigger down to their well-being. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to not actually agree with what is said in certain circumstances, but it will only occur if they work in isolation. But if women work in cooperatives, I think they should be able to get better opportunities in these key areas that he has already highlighted. So in essence, if you are working in a fish industry or you're working in agriculture, just form cooperatives, put your resources together as women, empower each other, and see how best you can go forward. But if you work in isolation, like I want to become the millionaire of the day, or this one wants to become the millionaire, they won't get it right. We can only work in cooperatives, work in groups before we can get it right as women.
Lorsqu'on regarde le graphique, en fait, le tableau là, bon, c'est pas.
I can say that I don't understand this table, but I just want to give an example to introduce the opportunities, for example, that South Africa has in order to see, in order to be able to dive into entrepreneurship. We have consumption products and we have drinks. So I do think that when looking at taking on board the gender issue in the opportunities provided by South Africa, so you see already the food product and the drinks are a product whereby women can find themselves in that. But consequently, it's an opportunity to teach women to entrepreneurship in this field. Because yesterday we were told that the training does not suffice. We have to be taught. So they have to seize it, knowing that there is a potential market, an opportunity that is created. And when we go to school, we teach women things in the field so that they can gain the market when the time is ripe.
Is it clear how to read this graph for everyone, or should I explain? Maybe I can explain quickly. So here you have the 50 products with the most, the best export potential from Africa to the South African market. So the size of each square represents the relative volume of potential exports that the South African market can absorb in terms of African imports. So you can see that the additives for food, which are chemicals, represent a very big potential for imports in South Africa. The darker square is the amount of the potential that is already realized. However, the lighter square is the untapped potential. So for this category of product, only 55% of the export potential to South Africa is realized. It means that 45% of the potential is untapped. And this is the same for each of the squares here. I hope it's clear.
Actually, my concern is on the other side of opportunities. Just as our course is on gender, and it's about free trade, it's about reducing barriers and tariffs like that. So in this case, using export opportunities, like for instance in electricity, will have an advantage in reducing the workloads of women who are living in South Africa. Because in most cases, women are more engaged in unpaid domestic works. So if you utilize those opportunities, will reduce the workloads of women. Even this is also one of the opportunities for South Africans, even for those countries who are use this opportunity also create some sort of employment opportunities, and also other it also give us a big opportunity to addressing vulnerabilities, because vulnerabilities as a result of not having jobs and incomes. So this is one of the opportunities.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm coming back to talk about agriculture. The agricultural sector, when we look at it, is important to look at the liberalization rate in terms of tariff concessions. I don't think agricultural sector at the moment, or even in the next 10 to 15 years, will be liberalized, because most countries have placed this under exclusive list of exclusion, where they don't want to negotiate at the moment. When we move now to process agricultural products, it is important to look at the present role of women in terms of transformation. What is the percentage of women involved in agro-processing? This is a problem. I don't have data for this, but from observation, it is a problem. So if women are to fully take advantage of the African continental free trade area, and if we go by the current pace, I'm afraid we're leaving our women in this whole project of an integrated Africa. Because there are sectors, we are looking at chemicals, the percentage of women, even through STEM, where they encourage women in science and technology, the percentage of women in chemical industry or energy is relatively low compared to other regions of the world. So there is need for quantitative and qualitative data analysis to be able to bring out way we can encourage women, and that work is supposed to start now. Thank you.
Yes. Since we are talking about trans-border trade, okay? For example, if we take the case of electricity, as my brother here said, it would be a very good opportunity for South African women, okay? In terms of alleviation of a workload and so on and so forth. But if you consider that South Africa actually sources its electricity from other countries for a great part of it, you know, electricity from the big dams. There are a lot of discussions now around the Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which will have dire impacts on women in Congo. Okay, so we need to look at all of this when we talk about what might be opportunities for some, might be displacement for others. Okay? Thanks.
So now our colleague was telling us that some goods might be excluded from liberalization commitments under the CFTA. So, as you may know, the negotiations over tariff commitments are still ongoing, so we don't know yet what will be liberalized on the CFTA and what will not be liberalized. However, there is a decision made by our heads of state when they last met in Niamey in July that the commitments have to be negotiated by the end of this year so that they could adopt the decision or the schedules that have been negotiated and start trading under the CFTA preference by the 1st of July. So now on the screen right now is the guiding principles for the negotiation that the countries are requested to follow. So there will be 3 baskets of products for each country. The countries will have to create 3 baskets of products, one of non-sensitive products. So this basket of products means that for 90% of their tariff lines, the countries shall eliminate the tariff over a 5-year period for non-LDCs and a 10-year period for LDCs. Then they can identify a basket of 7% of tariff lines, which are deemed sensitive and which will have a longer period to dismantle the tariff over those products. So non-LDCs will have 10 years to liberalize those products under the sensitive basket, and the LDCs will have 13 years. And finally, countries are also allowed to exclude a few products from liberalization commitments that are deemed of very, very sensitive for the local economy, either because of the revenue they generate or because of the socio-economic importance of those goods for local populations. And for those products, there will be no liberalization commitment, with the caveat that this list of products should not represent more than 3% of the tariff line, and it should not represent more than 10% of the value of imports from other African countries over a reference period of 3 years. So we don't know, so it will be the average of those 3 years. We don't know yet what is the reference period, whether it's 2015 to 2017 or 2016 to 2018. This is still under discussion, but this is the principle. Now, you may also know that a few countries have also expressed reserve on these modalities, and they would like to have some additional flexibilities. So this group of countries called G6 now, there were 7 countries, now Djibouti has pulled out of this group. So they requested to have an initial level of ambition of only 85%. So the 85% is this basket of non-sensitive products, which will be liberalized over 5 and 10 years for non-LECs and LECs. So this group of 6 countries wants to be able to liberalize those products over 15 years. So basically you have, if you just do the math, the overall ambition of the CFTA, at this stage at least, is to liberalize 97% of tariff lines, representing 90% of the volume of intra-African trade, within 13 years, 15, if we take into consideration the flexibilities for the G7. Now, based on what you have seen in the slide before, representing the export opportunities in South Africa, for example, using your own country's experience, how the list of excluded products could be used in a gender-sensitive manner to help women to better seize the opportunity. A lot of countries' agricultural products could be excluded products.
Yeah, thank you. There is this risk of saying that there are certain countries that solely rely on agricultural export. Let me take the case of Zimbabwe with tobacco, maize, and other products. If these products are on the list of exclusion, Zimbabwe is not going to trade. That is clear. You take Uganda and tea. If they exclude agricultural products, they are not going to trade. So that is the problem, because most African countries have a high concentration of trade in few tariff lines or chapters. So if, like the case that was being done with the Economic Partnership Agreement, Europe actually opted for effective import and export and tariff lines. There was the combination of the two to arrive at 85%. Because if we relied on tariff lines, the volume of trade will seem to be higher, but in actual terms there is no trade. Because most African countries have active and inactive tariff lines. For example, Cameroon does not produce automobiles. If we liberate automobiles, then we are fooling ourselves. There will actually be no trade because we don't produce this. We look at pharmaceuticals, we don't produce. If we are liberalizing, who is going to export? But Ethiopia can liberalize pharmaceuticals, and they will do well in that, as well as Mauritius Island. So these are some of the problems. And if we have to protect the interest of women in this trade, we will equally be doing them harm, because this sector will not evolve and not be competitive. For example, we look at rice import on the continent, which is a sector that can generate a lot of employment and forex to countries. If we say, no, we are not liberalizing agriculture, rice is under agriculture, there will be no way to go into exceptions under agriculture. So these are some of the problems that are really on the table of negotiations at the moment. Hopefully, if you have to enjoy your omelette, you must break the egg to have it. So I think that's the policy approach to take.
Before we continue, We've heard about chapters, tariff lines. So does that make sense to everyone? Just to be clear, so what we are talking about is a type of classification for goods. Most of our countries are member of the World Customs Organization, and under this organization there is a classification of commodities which sets a common basis to identify products. So the products are classified in sections, in chapters, in headings and subheadings, which allows to have a finer disaggregation of the type of products. So this is what we are talking about. And when we talk about tariff line, we talk about a specific level of disaggregation of those clusters of products, which is specific to each national nomenclature. So, please.
Oui, merci. Donc, je reviens sur d'abord la classification des pays. Donc, les pays sont classés en non-list developed, list et le groupe de 7. Donc, quand on a vu le tableau là où il y a les trucs de rond là où il y a import, export, Afrique du Sud et autres. Mais quand on classe les pays selon le truc, pour les produits non sensitifs, ça aussi la classification reste parce que pour ceux qui sont nouveaux, ils ne peuvent pas savoir c'est quoi les produits non sensitifs, les produits sensitifs.
Products were sensitive and non-sensitive. Secondly, the classification of countries, which are those which are the least developed, the non-least, and the least developed. It's in relation to your exposition.
Ou bien c'est au niveau global. Ça aussi c'est à définir. Parce que le tableau comme ça, statistiquement vu, ça sera difficile d'interpréter. Parce qu'il faut dorénavant avoir une classification non seulement des pays aussi, et des produits aussi, pour savoir lequel est chose. Donc, à travers ça, je pense bien que j'aimerais en venir au truc genre. Pour mener une étude genre, il faut forcément savoir quels sont les pays où les femmes travaillent beaucoup plus et dans quel domaine. Ça, c'est pour intégrer l'aspect genre, quoi. En fait, si on prend par exemple Sénégal, il y a le truc de pêche, où les femmes sont vraiment bien choses. Donc, est-ce par rapport à ça, on pouvait
in relation to that, can we classify this product under the gender basis or whatever? That's what I want to know. Thank you. I think it is important that we speak the same language concerning the countries category.
On décidé de classer les pays africains en PMA et non PMA. Donc les PMA, selon la classification officielle des Nations Unies, bénéficient des périodes transitoires les plus longues. Tous les autres pays, tous ceux qui ne sont pas sur cette liste de PMA, sont considérés comme non PMA et relèvent donc de la première catégorie des non PMA et donc qui ont des périodes de démantèlement tarifaire plus courtes. Concernant les catégories de produits, il est à la charge de chaque pays de décider quel produit va être considéré comme non sensible, comme sensible ou comme exclu des engagements de libéralisation. Donc ce tableau-là que vous avez, ce sont simplement les lignes directrices qui ont été adoptées par les instances de négociation pour la désignation des produits qui vont entrer dans leurs engagements.
Look at the products that will be tariff commitments within the African Free Trade Area.
Lorsque vous me posez la question de savoir, lorsque vous me dites que la participation des femmes dans chaque secteur dont on a parlé lors de la diapo précédente est spécifique au contexte national, voire régional, vous avez tout à fait raison. Et c'est la question que je vous pose en réalité, c'est de savoir, en partant donc de vos expériences, qu'est-ce que vous pouvez me dire des risques par rapport à la négociation et à la participation des femmes dans la zone de libre-échange continentale? Est-ce que vous pouvez me donner des exemples ou
African Free Trade Area. Can you give me some examples? What advice would you give to negotiators in order to better take into account the gender dimension in the negotiations? Merci.
To make a small contribution again to the classification of sensitive, non-sensitive, and exclusion list. The understanding at the level of the technical unit is that for a country to classify a product under exclusion list, there are conditionalities that were given by the technical organ at the level of the African Union. That product must be linked to national security. That product must be linked to food self-sufficiency. That product must be linked to health questions. That product must be linked to, I think there were 5 criteria under which a country can categorize products under list of exclusion. So you must, all these elements must be united for you to justify that you cannot liberalize this domain. For example, arms. There are countries that are facing conflict situations like the Boko Haram and the Islamist militia. They won't liberalize arms because that's a regulated domain. So that is the contribution I wanted to make. Thank you.
Can we hear from our participants? There are 40 of you, so yes, please.
Ok, merci. Il faut déjà dire que...
Or specify. Oui, il a appuyé sur le micro, c'est bon. I think we can say that the state of Côte d'Ivoire is more or less, of course, engaged in this principle since 1991 through the price liberalization process, but there are certain products that Côte d'Ivoire calls high-risk products. That is, products that actually affect mass consumption like rice, sugar, and so on, to such an extent that Côte d'Ivoire has taken steps to quantify imports in this direction. For example, in Côte d'Ivoire, sugar is a prohibited product. You cannot import products in Côte d'Ivoire because there are local structures that produce them. So the state does everything to protect these national products. And security also, weapons are prohibited with the crisis that this country has gone through. So the imports of arms are completely prohibited. Thank you. J'ai une question sur la période de libéralisation. Dans le CER, et surtout dans le CER, il y a des pays en voie de développement et les moins développés. Donc, comment est-ce qu'on peut traiter de cela? Est-ce qu'ils doivent commencer le même temps? Ou bien l'union douanière doit effectivement avoir sa période aussi de commencer. L'un des principes des négociations, c'est de respecter ce qui a été effectivement accompli au niveau régional, au niveau des CER, qui se sont...
Customs Union is to present one market access offer. So there is discussion right now on how to treat a customs union when there are both LDCs and non-LDCs within the customs union. This is an issue that has not been sorted out yet. However, we expect the customs union to make a suggestion, and what will likely happen is that the customs union will self-designate as an LDC or a non-LDC, and they will present one offer.
Just to make a small contribution out here, at the level of ECOWAS, they have put in place an internal compensation mechanism to LDCs because as a custom union, they said we have Mali, we have Burkina Faso, which are LDCs. So they said they could not go on different variations. So they agreed that there will be a compensation mechanism within for the LDCs. So they have to take the same tariff concessions and over the same period of time. So I was coming back to try to structure the AFCFTA because we are talking about tariff offers. I think some colleagues are asking questions. At the level of the AFCFTA, there are 6 protocols. The AFCFTA agreement is an umbrella agreement under which you have 6 protocols. You have the protocol on goods, the protocol on services, the protocol on dispute settlement, the protocol on investment, the protocol on competition policy, and intellectual property. The first phase of negotiation, which is almost under completion, is that which constitutes the first 3 protocols. That's the protocol on trade in goods, trade in services, and dispute settlement. At the moment, we are very much focused at the level of trade in goods, where they are talking about the last 2 annexes that must be treated for trade to go into play. That is the annex on tariff concession and the annex on rules of origin. So these are the 2 annexes that are blocking the operationalization of trade at the level of the borders. After which, next year, normally we're supposed to start this year, but next year, we are going to move into negotiations on trade in services, which comprise transport, tourism, financial services, and other aspects. Thank you.
Well, that was the discussion for another slide, but well, thank you. That will make my work much easier. Anyone wants to intervene?
Merci. Je reviens encore toujours sur les produits. En fait, si on...
You see, if we take, for example, gold, we exploit them in Mali and Burkina. If Burkina says is sensitive and Mali says no, doesn't that bring some problems with regard to the 2 countries? One says gold is sensitive, the other says it's not. And yet both countries produce. How do you resolve such a problem? Because there are a lot of cases in agriculture and any other areas. So how do you resolve such an impasse? Well, it is important to understand that when we talk about the designation of products as sensitive, excluded, and so on, it means the countries accept or do not accept to eliminate the customs duties on the import of this product. So for those countries which are not in the customs union, it means, let's take an example, Egypt. Let's say Egypt decides to, for reasons known to it, not to remove customs duties on gold coming from South Africa, from Egypt or into Egypt. That is a national decision. Now, Mali and Burkina belong to the same customs union, and I think the customs rights or customs duties have been removed. Now the question is this: how is ECOWAS going to treat the importation of gold coming from the rest of the continent? How do you handle the importation of gold from the rest of the continent into ECOWAS? So this is a decision that the customs union has to look at, and then move that across the entire continent. So before we get into the CFTA forum, this has to be looked at.
The presentation, the table that you've just presented, because the font is a little bit small, but I wanted to check if the area of tourism, arts and industry is covered, speaking particularly for Zimbabwe and South Africa. The women in Zimbabwe are skilled and they have hand skills. They weave baskets and so on. Certain clothes that are particularly interested or actually particularly interest the tourism sector. Tourists who come to South Africa, Cape Town and so on, they go as far as Cape Town. So I didn't really see that area clearly, if it's covered, as well as the arts and entertainment industry.
Okay, thank you very much. So, just to echo what our colleague was saying, so there are other dimensions to the negotiation. For the time being, we are only talking about trade in goods because this is the main focus of the discussion. However, the negotiation will also cover the liberalization of trade in services, and tourism is one of those services that shall be liberalized. This being said, when it comes to trade in goods, one of the principles of the negotiation is to not eliminate a priori any good from the discussion. So from the onset, it has been decided that we can talk of any type of good. We will not exclude from the discussion any type of good. So in the outcome of the discussion, some products will be excluded from liberalization commitments. However, it doesn't preclude from having a discussion about these goods. I hope it clarifies.
Oui, merci. Donc, pour revenir à...
To come back to your concern on the question of women in the case of liberalization, well, there are sectors that use a lot of labor, like agriculture, and so the risk for this sector is the loss of potential work. For example, if you take the production of, let's say, potatoes where a lot of women are employed, the risk for liberalization in some countries is that this production will be facing very unfair competition from some producer countries, and so there is the risk of loss of jobs. And I think the statistics will serve as a great deal, because we need a lot of data to know really the employments that are created, both for men and women, and the incomes, potential incomes that these two draw from this sector. So it is important. Well, to take a decision, the statistics will be very important. Thank you.
I'd like to ensure with everyone that all the jargon we're using is clear. Is it the case? Did you understand what we are talking about? If you have any question, please do not hesitate to ask, because now we'll be just building on what has been said before.
Yes, I would like to reinforce the point. Does everybody understand what tariff modalities are about? Those who are not trade people. Yeah? It's clear for everybody? Yeah, okay, just to be sure, basically you correct me if I say wrong things. It's about the trade taxes that we talked about during the previous sessions, okay? So trade liberalization basically is about eliminating those trade taxes. So the tariffs are about the percentage of trade taxes that are applied in different countries, okay? Is it clear? So that's why there are negotiations about how many years each country has to eliminate or to reduce its tariffs. That is the percentage of trade taxes that they apply on different goods and services. All right? Okay, thanks.
I hope this is clear. So I can't re-emphasize too much. So these taxes are applied on goods imported on a given country. They do not apply to the taxes produced in your own country. They are import taxes. And what we are talking about is how and to what extent eliminate those taxes on international trade to boost trade between each other. Is it clear? Any comment? Any question? So now we are getting into hardcore discussion on free trade agreements. So I hope this is the notion of tariff is really clear. Because when you are, once again, I also emphasize that we are talking about tariff liberalization, so we are freeing up the movement of goods across the continent. So this being said, there are two things that you really need to understand. Is that one, the free trade agreement for goods liberalization aims at removing the import taxes to boost trade. However, because we live in a globalized world, you have goods from all around the world which are circulating in and outside the continent. And we need to ensure that the preferences negotiated under the CFTA are only given to goods produced in Africa or into a partner state, a country which is member of the CFTA agreement. And for this, there are a certain number of conditions that are applied for granting the preference, for granting this tariff reduction or tariff elimination. So we call that the rules of origin, meaning how to determine the origin of a product, where it has been manufactured. And if this, according to those rules, the product has indeed been manufactured in a country where a preference, in a country which participates in an FTA, and if the product is not excluded from liberalization commitment, in that case, it will benefit from the preference. And there are several layers to this set of rules. It's a very bulky document. Just for the CFTA, for example, the rules of origin is an annex to the protocol on trade in goods, and for the time being, it's about 40 pages, but it will probably go up to over 200, because the draft rules of origin for the time being are over 200 pages. In most agreements, it's the case. It's a very bulky document. You have usually one rule per product. So you need to be able to understand the jargon, understand how it means, and how to comply with these rules so that you can benefit from the preference. So now I will very simplify the realities. We'll consider that either you have the tariff or you don't have it, or you benefit from the preference and there's no tariff, and that it doesn't cost anything to comply with the rules, which is not the case in reality, because, well, you need to eventually change your processing methods to comply with the rules. You need to take time and resources to go here and there to get the certificates to prove where your goods are originating from. And freer trade means more paperwork, basically. So now, because we don't have the schedules of commitment under the CFTA, I've used some of our reg FTAs to illustrate my point. So in average, the MFN duty, meaning the duty which is applied to the rest of the world for the countries in the Agadir Agreement, for example, is 20.8%, meaning that the tax applied to goods imported from the world is in average 20.8% in countries who are part of the Agadir Agreement. But thanks to this agreement, the average tax applied to goods originating from one of the countries of the Agadir Agreement is only 0.6%. It means that the goods exchanged under the Agadir Agreement benefit from a rebate of 20.2% on the the import tax, sorry. In the EAC region, the preferential margin, meaning this rebate, is of 100%. So the difference between, or your competitive advantage within the region is this 25% import tax. In ECOWAS, it's 20%. In the COMESA FTA, it's 13.4%. And in SADC, it's 15.2%. Now, this being said, I just mentioned before that you need to prove that your products are indeed coming from a country part of the FTA. So for that, there are 4 things you need to ensure. The first one is that, well, the country is coming from a country which is member of the FTA, and that the country where the product is imported has taken commitments to liberalize the trade in that specific good. For example, in the we'll use an example a bit later. I'll use the example of couches. So under the ECOWAS agreement, for example, Benin will allow to not charge any import duty on couches from Nigeria, for example, if it can be proven that Benin has agreed to not levy any duty on couches from Nigeria. So is the good covered by a preference? That's the first question. The second question is, does it meet the origin criteria? So basically, to consider that a good is indeed produced in one of the partner states, you need to show that this good, if it's an agricultural good, has been either cultivated or has been harvested, or the meat has been coming from an animal raised and slaughtered in your country. And if it's manufactured products, you need to show that there has been sufficient value added in your country to consider that this good has been created there, even if you have imported some of the inputs from the rest of the world. So these are the rules of origin. I won't go into the details. We can have a discussion about it if you wish. But basically, is the economic nationality of your good from one of the partner states? I hope it's clear. So this is number 2. And you have a very detailed list of the type of transformation each good has to undergo to be considered as produced in a partner state. Once this is done and you ensure that the process that the good has undergone is compliant with the rule, you also need to prove that when you export that good to to an importing country which is part of the FTA, the product has not transited in another country where alteration can have been made on that product. So there is a rule which says that you need to be able to track the transportation of the exporting country to the importing country so that it is proven there has been no alteration. This is the third thing you need to take into consideration when applying for preference. And then you need to show to the custom officer in the importing country that, well, you have respected all that steps. And for each of these steps, there is a paper to fill in and to give evidence that you comply with the rules. This is the reason why I was telling you that, well, freer trade is more paperwork. And although we don't take it into consideration, well, it has a cost in terms of time, in terms of altering your supply chain, in terms of storage cost. So, knowing all of this, what can you suggest to make free trade fairer in terms of gender balance? Knowing that there are a lot of things to take into consideration, like more things to take into consideration, that if you are not trading under preference, that it requires a lot of specialized knowledge, it requires eventually to alter your supply chains. So in terms of gender balance, or in terms of economic opportunity for women, what does that mean? Okay, maybe it's a bit hazy, a bit abstract, Okay, let's try to use an example to illustrate the point, okay? So as I said, let's take a couch producer in Senegal, right? And you want to export that couch to South Africa where you have found a potential buyer. However, the competition on couches in South Africa is very fierce, and your buyer says, well, I'm willing to deal and to do business with you in case the price I have to pay in total, including the import duty, is 135 in any unit you wish. So I'm willing, so your South African customer is willing to pay maximum 135 monetary unit. Now, looking at your supply chain, it's fairly flexible, and to make your couch, you use wood either from China or from Congo. You have a supplier in China, and he's willing to offer you 15 units for the wood. Your Congo supplier is a bit more expensive because of transportation costs, because of overhead costs, because of the cost of electricity, whatever. So he offers 25. Okay. Please come back. Just 1 second, please. So, sorry? Excuse me? Vous pouvez nous aider? Vous pouvez nous aider, le diaporama n'arrête pas de se barrer. Okay. Okay. So the hardware is coming from Germany. So all the, I don't know, the screws, the nails, whatever you use to keep the frame together. Now the fabric is Okay, thank you. The fabric is coming from the workshop next door. The foam is coming from Thailand. And, well, you have your processing costs. Now, you know that Senegal and South Africa are members of the CFTA, and that South Africa offers 100% rebate on the import duty if you can prove that the couch has been made in Senegal. Otherwise, you have to pay a 20% import duty. And to prove that the couch has been made in Senegal, you have to show that you have added at least 60% of value to the imported to the inputs. So here I'd like to apologize to all the customs officers. So it's a very simplistic example just to illustrate the point. So let's try to make the exercise. Can you please, or can you do business with this South African buyer? I can give you 5-10 minutes to think about it and tell me. Now, there is one thing that you may want to know, is that the CFTA also provides that if you're able to show that your imported inputs are coming from another African country, member of the CFTA, well, it can be considered as originating from your own country. So in our case, if you can show that the wood you import from Congo is indeed originating in Congo, then it will be considered as Senegalese. Okay. So now we have all the information to answer my question. Can you do business with this South African buyer?
Yeah, thank you, bro. You can do business with the South African buyer because when you take at when you look at the wood, it is having 25% from Congo, 35% from Senegal, and 20% from Senegal. If you do an addition, it gives you an eligibility of about 70% or 80%. So under the AFCFTA, it will go for 0%.
Anyone else? So we have here one opinion. Anyone else? You see, the point I'm trying to make is that, well, you seem to be baffled by this exercise. But in real life, it's much more complex than that. And you are all trained people. Imagine for people who have not received your professional training. Okay, so if you do the calculation, you can see that if you import the wood from China, then the cost of the couch, let's say that your profit is included. Huh? So you can sell this couch at 120, and if you import it from Congo, the wood, then it costs 130 to your buyer. Okay? So which one would you go for? Go for the cheapest, because that's what your business partner would go for. However, you need to ensure that the couch can be considered as originating in Senegal. And for that, the rule of origin is 60% value addition, meaning that at least 60% of the value of the final good should be added in Senegal. So we'll have to do a short calculation to know what share of the value has been added in Senegal and what share of the value has been added elsewhere. And if this share is 60% or more, then, well, you can benefit from the duty exemption.
Yeah.
Okay? So if you use wood from China, then the inputs from Senegal are only the fabric and the processing costs. So 35 plus 20 divided by the sum of all the inputs. And the value added in Senegal in that case is only 45.9%. So you cannot, even if it's cheaper to produce using a Chinese input, then you would not qualify for a preference. And in that case, you have to pay the 20% duty in South Africa. However, if you source the wood from Congo, which is a bit more expensive, but then it can be considered as originating in Senegal, so that you can add that to the local content, and therefore we can add the wood to the fabric and to the processing costs. And in that case, well, the value, the considered value added in Senegal is over 60%. So here you have to choose or to maybe make arrangements in your supply chain. You maybe need to change your suppliers here and there to qualify for preference. And this takes time, this takes resources, you need to do some market research, so this has implication on your business costs. Okay?
Oui, je voudrais bien comprendre. En fait, lorsque the
calculation that was done shows that the products of origin from Senegal, and yet the wood comes from Congo, maybe these are African products of African origin. You see, when you look at the annex on the rules of origin on the African Free Trade Area, there is, in fact, something that says that you have to favor the regional chain. And so the agreement says that you should consider as a local continent materials coming from other African countries with a view to integrating the African free trade area. And so the question is this: your commercial partner, is he going to really accept to buy your furniture? So if you bought the wood from Congo or the timber from Congo, which is more expensive, and you expect to, of course, benefit from the customs union, and you want to buy it from China, when you don't meet the origin criteria, you have to pay the customs duty. And you'll be an important. If you obtain your supplies from China, the final cost is 145, and he can do business with you if the maximum price will be 135 from his standpoint. Now, if you decide to, of course, obtain supplies from Congo and your margin is a bit smaller, you can do business with him. So with this example, I hope you understand, I hope you do now, how the free trade agreement functions. You know, there are a lot of things that have to be taken into account. So how can women who a priori do not have access to training and so on and so forth can draw on the free trade area that is, obtain some sort of benefits from the free trade area. So the floor is open. Si on prend l'exemple.
So China and yeah, looking at the example on the board, there is the risk that despite liberalization, if we look at the profit or the cost, Africa might still not trade within itself, because the alternative of importing out of Africa, for example, from China, and still paying the 20% MFN, it still enters the market lower than trading at zero tariff. I don't know if I make myself clear. What I'm saying is that the alternative, when we look at considering technological advances elsewhere and the finishing of certain products, we might import in Africa still without duty-free, still higher than importing from China, paying the 20% MFN. What are some of the considerations to put this under control? I know they might talk of trade facilitation, but looking at the production cost alone and having free access to the market, the products still remain high. So what are the considerations at the level of maybe those who are doing the job to ensure also that the prices are competitive?
Okay, so the first thing is that, as our colleague said, so Africa might not be competitive on international markets. And the second thing is that, knowing this reality, what does it mean for women in business? So you wanted the floor, so.
Not just to add a bit and say, au regard de la zone de libre-échange, c'est vraiment...
Is fairly complex, as we've just demonstrated. And my colleagues talked about aspects in areas where women sometimes get into training. We've been briefed about this aspect, but with regard to the fact that there are some missing links to get them integrated. They remain in the informal sector, and here we are being asked to go through, certain rigorous processes. It will be difficult for our women to get in there, and unless there is some flexibility, that is, focus things towards gender. I see 61% and so on. In terms of products of African origin, in statistics, we can say there is close to 60% or 61%. But I think for women, we can have a rate which makes it possible that our African women will have more possibility to strengthen their capacity to enable them to be mainstreamed in the system. It's a bit complex, but this is what I can say. Thank you so much. I've just understood that at this level, we have to look at the rules of origin, and it's such a technical notion where you need technicity. But in the practical case, we see that women are not more technical than the men, but you need competitiveness or skills in this area. So we have to meet this challenge, particularly with regard to women, by getting trained, because men cannot go to the men. It is the women who have to actually be aware by going through training to participate in this process. Thank you. Thank you so much. Here, I think it's purely technical. Gender cannot intervene. Where gender, yes, it's a theorem. In theorem, there's no X or Y. So where we can put the gender aspect is to facilitate for women the access to visas for them to enter other countries. Otherwise, they cannot make any headway here. Thank you. It's purely technical. J'ai entendu vos réactions.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole.
I have some questions. I wonder if his mic is off. I wonder if, yeah, please sit. I think, let me steal the chair of my friend before he or she comes. I wonder if all of us are looking at the members here in this room. Somebody was saying that we are 41 persons, and it gives the impression that it's only one person who speaks. It doesn't mean that the other trainees are not speaking. But what is being developed here is purely technical. And this, of course, refers to structures of foreign affairs or trade. It is these structures that have to take the very content of the text of the free trade area. We who are here, I think we will gain a lot if the advantages and disadvantages of the free trade area. I, in particular, it is true, I've been working for about 10 years now, but here I've just come from the university to do a master's in planning and development, and this is why I'm here. And when I return, I have to exchange with the other students what I came to learn here. Now, if I tell you that I can go over what you have done, I'll be telling a lie. But if I'm able to capture what this free trade area in Africa will be profitable to each nation, and see within which framework of this seminar can draw an advantage from what our heads of states have ratified to make it effective, I would have done I would have made a good trip in coming here. I want to continue by saying that I may be mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong. It seems that Nigeria hasn't yet signed the free trade area, the African continental free trade area. Ratify or sign, take whichever term you prefer. A short while ago, you said that the notion of specialization had been selected. I'm an economist by background, and so we had this notion in international trade and international economics. But let me say this. there is the case of Venezuela, which is currently being discussed everywhere. It is thought that the president of Venezuela hasn't diversified the economy, but that's not the issue. I think with issues of free trade, we enter into specialization, and with specialization, we forget to diversify the economy. You see, the day that the product you concentrated on receives an exogenous shock, it is clear that you wouldn't have any more source of entering the country, and therefore the society will start saying that you didn't do what you had to do, and yet it is the cause of specialization that has brought you to this stage. Another thing, Morocco wants to enter ECOWAS. I don't know if the officials of ECOWAS have given their agreement or not. But I need to be explained to, my question is this. If Morocco comes to ECOWAS, it is, of course, for market purposes. There's no sentiment or feelings in business, as Madam Aissatou said yesterday. Now, when we take the case of Togo, Togo doesn't produce anything. In fact, we export, but we don't have industries to produce. As long as we don't produce, there's no value added. And so we are doing a free trade area so that you come to sell. Now, if I don't produce, who come and sell? You see, it is the others who come to sell. So with other types of agreement, we are opening our doors to foreigners to come and just sell off their products. So I don't know, in your development, are you going to get to a level where we would have some safeguards to avoid that the European Union, which is more advanced with regard to industrialization, and China, which only wants to sell its products? Is there any mechanism that will help us to block that? Because it is said that the friend of my friend is my friend. So those who sell to us will continue to sell, and who will just continue to be pure consumers. Well, there are several things I would like to say at this stage. We need to go on break, part problem, but I'll ask the indulgence of the interpreter for 10 minutes. Okay, no problem. So 10 minutes. Now to answer, my friend, this is why I insisted on the notions we saw a short while ago, because the objective of this slide is not to talk about rules of origin, but to show you to what extent it is difficult to interpret and implement a free trade agreement from the standpoint of economic operators. Because it is the economic operators who, in fine, will be the beneficiaries of the agreement, even though it's an international agreement and it is for countries to implement them. And it is they who are responsible or legally responsible for the implementation of the agreement. But finally, it is the economic operators who benefit from it. So we are not going to the details of knowing the place of Africa economically to integrate itself in economic trade. If there's another discussion, after a coffee break, we can look at it. Or there are several occasions to look at it. The question is this: knowing what you need to know, the difficulties that economic operators generally benefit from the preference. Just to give you a figure to explain, in the most integrated space in the world, the European Union, it's only 70% of economic operators are able to benefit from preferences. A recent study that took into account 18 free trade agreements that European Union has with its economic partners. Remember, the European Union has more than 70 agreements. Now, out of these 70, they realize that only 60% of their enterprises are able to draw on positively on this free trade area, and the losses represent about $3 billion for 2016. Now, this loss because it's very, very difficult for the European Union, because if their preferences were used, they could have been saved from it. So in a context where the operators are less competitive in relation to their international competitors, in a context where African economies are less integrated, or in a context in relation to that women do not have the same access to investments, financing, training, and so on, how can you, as a negotiator or an economic advisor, ensure that the gender dimension is better taken into account during the preparation of the strategy for the implementation of the FTC in your country? This is very, very clear, because in the next session after the coffee break, this is what we are going to discuss. So all the notions we've seen up to this point are the prerequisites to get integrated in order to integrate the African Free Trade Area. So we've talked a lot about the goods trade, your colleague explained it, and then the agreement establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area has several protocols, and the agreement is therefore a framework agreement that contains protocols, one on the protocol on goods, the rules of origin are just an annex. And once we finish integrating the tariff commitments, the rules of origin, and all other annexes as protocols, and the protocol on investments, and then the policy of competition and so on, plus the provisions relating to the settlement of disputes. It means the agreement establishing the African Free Trade Area will arrive on the desks of our policymakers, and these policymakers would have to take a strategic decision as regards their chain of supplies or supply chains. How is it possible for business managed by women to better take advantage of this document covering about 4,000 pages to draw on the economic construction of the continent? So what are the mechanisms that can set up the states to help our enterprises to draw on the African Continental Free Trade Area? This is what we'll be looking at after the break. So these two questions, let's take into account the limits produced by the modalities. To what extent will the tariff reforms affect the differentiated differences between men and women? And if it's the ACR-RTA, how? Because when we take into account the preferences that will be negotiated, there's a whole list of procedures to be followed in order to benefit from the preferences. The question is therefore, will that also affect men, or let's say women and men producers in a differentiated manner, and how? This is the question I want you to bear in mind as you take your coffee and your tea, because when we come to the next session, which will be handled by Nabira. You would have to reflect on how you set up mechanisms or strategies to be able to better take into account the gender dimension, to better actually take account of the AFTC. Any questions before we zoom off from here? Thank you for giving me the floor. I have one concern. If we look at the complementarity that exists in our countries and the nature of our products, that isn't that a break on integration? If you take the DRC, Congo, and Gabon, let's take cement as a product. And if you look at the list of products, and on the other side of the line, we produce the same product, isn't that an obstacle to the development of trade? Because in your explanation, you said that we should give monopoly to the countries to mention their sensitive products. So if we take my country, for example, it is cement that brings us a lot of foreign exchange. And if you block it, it means cement cannot enter the country. Isn't that a problem? Well, I'm returning the question to you. How are you going to choose your excluded or sensitive products? Sorry, not sensible, sensitive products. How are you going to define your priorities, bearing in mind this constraint and the sensitivity of your country and the socioeconomic stakes in your countries? And in addition to that, please bear in mind the gender dimension in all that. You can't escape from that.
Just to make a small contribution concerning the worries that were raised by Mr. Gwetu, I want to say that the AFCFTA is not a standalone tool within the continental agenda. We have around the AFCFTA what they call enablers, like the Accelerated Industrial Development Program. You have PIDA, the Program for Infrastructural Development, which are all programs that will enable the success of the AFCFTA. So if we have to think that we are opening up a market for other countries to come and sell, I think first there is the rule of origin that will not allow transshipment in Africa. So there are other programs that would, in the long run, make us benefit from the AFCFTA. Even within the European Union, they have put in place policy tools like Solvit, which after the studies that was carried out by Commerskollegium in Sweden, which indicated that about 70% of EU citizens, only about 70% of businesses in the EU make use of their preferential trade agreement. The other 30% was realized that they are not informed about the conditionalities and procedures. So they put in place the Solvit, which is an instrument that was there to come to their needs and provide some solutions. So it's a long-term project. It's not a project that we think that once we open the market, it will not go. Even the investment, there are other protocols that are coming into work to provide an enabling environment, like the investment protocol, to attract foreign direct investment to Africa. And I think we are already observing that with the automobile sector that is putting assemblies left and right on the continent. Thank you.
Oui, je voudrais vous rappeler encore une fois que l'essence même de ce cours
is to enable us to go beyond this technicity veil which prevents us from seeing the gender dimension. So don't be totally swept away by this technicity aspect on which maybe you don't have the skills to understand or act. But once again, we are here for that. When you try to answer the questions that are put to you, please remember what we said during the module on how the impacts of trade are transmitted and impact on gender you know. So once again, we are here because we are convinced, utterly convinced, that it isn't because it is technical that we cannot do anything with regard to gender equality. No, that's not the case. And this is all I want to recall to your mind. And for the next session, you are going to realize that there are many things that can be done. But Nadira will talk to you. She will handle that. Thank you. So on this note, let's go and take here around 11:15 for the second session. So have a good break. Thank you.